At 3:45 a.m., the radar screen flickered. The dots looked like ghosts. The operator whispered, "They're coming." Inside the concrete bunker at Worth Matravers, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Machines hummed softly, their dials glowing faintly in the dark. The sea outside was invisible. Only the wind hinted at its presence, a low hiss beyond the walls. Sergeant John Hopkins, 21, eyes red from lack of sleep, leaned closer to the circular display. The faint echoes had appeared just minutes ago, too symmetrical, too deliberate to be noise. He called over his shoulder, "Sir, I've got something." A senior officer, half-dressed, shuffled in with his tunic unbuttoned. "What sort of something?" Hopkins pointed to the green dots marching across the phosphor screen. "It's not weather. It's not static. It's formation. Big one." The officer frowned, rubbing his temples. "Could be a glitch. The storm's playing hell with the signals." Hopkins didn't look up. "It's not a glitch, sir. Look, heading straight for the channel. I count at least 200. The officer bent over the console, his shadow cutting across the light. The room felt suddenly smaller. At 3:48, the signal intensified, hundreds of moving shapes, perfectly spaced, advancing like a steel tide. Hopkins felt the back of his neck prickle. "They're flying low," he murmured, trying to slip under the line. He grabbed the field phone, the cord trembling in his hand. "Ops room, this is Chain Home South. We've got heavy traffic inbound, grid 94. Repeat, heavy traffic inbound." The reply was calm, bureaucratic, acknowledged. Possibly friendly aircraft returning. Hopkins clenched his jaw. "Negative. These aren't friendlies." No answer. He turned to the watch officer. "Sir, if we don't scramble now, they'll be over Southampton in 20 minutes. The man hesitated, just long enough for doubt to spread. It was the same hesitation that haunted all of them, the fear of being wrong. A false alarm meant panic, wasted fuel, humiliation. But if Hopkins was right, at 3:52, he made the decision himself. He lifted the receiver again, voice steady. "Filter room. Chain Home South confirms multiple bogies. Bearing east-southeast, altitude unknown. Recommend scramble." A long pause, then, message received. Standing by for verification. Hopkins slammed the receiver down, breath sharp. Verification? For what a miracle? The hum of machinery filled the silence. The women from the WAF, barely out of school, hair pinned up under headsets, watched him with wide eyes. They had been trained to track the enemy long before anyone fired a shot, but this moment, the first real one, made their hands tremble. Hopkins turned back to the scope. The wave had thickened. Each blip pulsed faintly, rhythmically, alive. "They're close," he whispered. Outside, the first light of dawn began to break, pale and uncertain. Somewhere across the sea, the German pilots were fastening their goggles, unaware that a young Englishman had already seen them coming through invisible waves of energy. At 4:10, the phone finally rang. A clipped voice, RAF Fighter Command. "Chain Home South. Confirm multiple hostiles detected. Scramble orders issued to Tangmere, Kinley, and Biggin Hill. Good work, Sergeant." Hopkins exhaled, only then realizing how tight his chest had been. He nodded to the team. "Mark their course. Keep tracking." The women began to move again, pencils scratching across plotting boards, the lines of attack drawn like veins across the map of southern England. The bunker, moments ago filled with doubt, now pulsed with purpose. 10 minutes later, distant sirens began to wail. The sound rose and fell, long and mournful, echoing across the coast. Portsmouth, Southampton, the Isle of Wight. People turned in their beds, unsure if it was another drill. But in the bunker, no one doubted anymore. The ghosts on the screen were real. Hopkins stepped outside for a breath, just for a second. The sky was bruised with early dawn, clouds low and thick over the channel. He could smell salt and rain. And then, faintly, he heard it. The dull thunder of engines far away, too many to count. Back inside, the phone lines crackled with overlapping voices. Fighter squadrons were airborne. The first contacts would meet over the coast within minutes. Hopkins returned to the console, eyes locked on the screen. "God help us," he said quietly. A technician nearby whispered, "You ever think about how strange it is, sir? Seeing them before anyone else does?" Hopkins didn't look away. "We see the future," he said. 15 minutes ahead of everyone else. The room fell silent except for the hum of the radar. The dots kept moving, steady, unstoppable. And as the first British fighters climbed into the pale morning, the war, the real one, had already begun. But few knew that this invisible weapon had been dismissed as madness just a few years earlier. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. He said he could spot a plane using radio waves. They laughed. Then they sent him to a field with a kite and a car battery. It was February 1935, Felixstowe, on the gray edge of the North Sea. The wind came hard off the water, flattening the grass and biting through wool coats. Robert Watson Watt, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and an absent-minded frown, stood beside a crude wooden shed surrounded by cables. His assistant, Arnold Wilkins, held a clipboard that flapped like a trapped bird. "You really think this'll work?" Wilkins asked. Watson Watt's hair was wild, his tie loose, his voice patient but weary. "I don't think," he said. "I calculate." They had been ordered to prove a ridiculous idea, not a weapon that could shoot down planes, but one that could see them. The Air Ministry had been searching for a death ray. What they got instead was a physicist with a radio transmitter and a stubborn streak. The test was crude. A biplane would fly through a beam of radio waves, and if the equipment worked, the returning echo would spike on the receiver. No explosions, no flash of light, just a twitch on a meter. By noon, clouds rolled in low and heavy. The ground team huddled near the generator, waiting for the signal. A distant engine droned somewhere above the gray. "There," Wilkins said, pointing at the instrument. The needle jumped, faint but rhythmic. Once, twice, again. Watson Watt leaned in, hardly daring to breathe. "That's it," he whispered. "We caught the echo." He wrote it down in his notebook, the letters quick and uneven. "The sky can speak." When the report reached London, the reaction was polite confusion. The Air Ministry clerk who read it scratched a note in the margin. "Interesting but impractical. Unlikely to have military value." They wanted beams of destruction, not whispers of science. A week later, Watson Watt was summoned to Whitehall. In a dim office smelling of pipe smoke, a colonel asked, "So you're telling me radio waves can find aircraft?" "I'm telling you they already have," Watson Watt replied. The colonel chuckled. "We're preparing for war, doctor, not birdwatching." Funding was delayed. Meetings multiplied. Reports disappeared into file cabinets. But Watson Watt persisted, writing letters at midnight, sketching diagrams on envelopes, fighting for what he called the shield of the future. By spring, he was testing along the coast again, this time with larger transmitters and taller masts. Farmers complained their wireless sets picked up strange humming at night. A fisherman from Suffolk reported that his compass went mad every evening at 9. Watson Watt smiled when he read the complaints, proof that his invisible wall was growing stronger. His colleagues thought him half-mad. One of them, a chemist from Cambridge, wrote in his diary, "The man sees ghosts in the air and calls it science." Still, the experiments continued. On a cold morning in April, a flight of RAF bombers passed 20 miles out to sea. The oscillograph flared like lightning. The echoes were sharp, steady, unmistakable. Watson Watt turned to Wilkins, eyes bright behind his glasses. "We've done it," he said. "We can see over the horizon." But the euphoria lasted only a day. The Air Ministry cut their budget by half, calling the project an interesting curiosity. The defense establishment wanted steel, not science, guns, not gadgets. In May, Watson Watt sent another memo. With sufficient funding, it is possible to establish a network of detection stations along the coast. Each could provide early warning of enemy aircraft. The reply came 2 weeks later. No immediate strategic value. File and defer. He kept working anyway. He built makeshift towers from scrap metal and wooden poles, stretching copper wire between them like the ribs of a giant. When locals asked what he was building, he'd grin and say, "A net for catching thunder." Sometimes, late at night, he'd stand alone among the antennas, listening to the hum of electricity in the wind. He knew that one day, someone would understand. Then, one August morning, news reached him that Germany had tested a new type of bomber capable of crossing the channel in under an hour. For the first time, the Air Ministry called him back. "Doctor," the colonel said, this time without a smile, "about your radio thing. How soon can we have it operational?" Watson Watt didn't answer immediately. He looked at the window, at the sky that had always seemed so empty before. "If we start now," he said quietly, "perhaps in time." They gave him a new office, a small team, and barely enough funds to buy tea and wire. But it was a beginning. The dreamer who had been laughed at now had the nation's attention and its desperation. Because if Germany had attacked in 1938, there would have been no radar. Just hope and binoculars. From Dover to Aberdeen, a forest of steel towers. Not castles, not guns, but the eyes of a nation. By the spring of 1939, Britain's coastline looked like something from another world. Thin spires of metal rose from fields and cliffs, their lattice frames slicing the sky. Each was taller than Big Ben, humming faintly in the wind. To fishermen and farmers, they were a mystery, monuments with no plaque, guardians with no faces. Children pointed at them from trains, asking, "What are those?" Parents shrugged. Weather stations, maybe. Only a handful of people knew the truth. In prefabricated huts beneath the towers, engineers worked in shifts, their tables cluttered with wires, resistors, and cold mugs of tea. The air smelled of oil and damp paper. Outside, the sea pounded the shore, carrying with it the rumor of war. Robert Watson Watt, now a commander in all but name, moved constantly between stations, from Dover to Ventnor, from Bodsey to Scarborough. The work was relentless, the deadlines impossible. "We are building a wall out of invisible bricks," he told his team. "And every brick matters." At Ventnor on the Isle of Wight, the wind howled day and night, shaking the scaffolding. One entry in a maintenance log from February 1939 reads, "Gusts at 70 miles per hour. Tower swaying 5 inches at the top. Equipment intact. Signal steady." Another line, written in pencil beneath it, simply says, "The wind tore the scaffolding, but the signal came through." Locals thought the project was madness. An old farmer complained to the local paper that the metal monsters were ruining his view of the cliffs. Another man swore the towers were listening to people's thoughts. The military said nothing. The secrecy was total. Each station became a heartbeat in a vast chain. Chain home, they called it. Signals leapt from one site to the next, traveling up the coast like a silent telegraph. From the first spark of transmission at Bodsey to the final echo received near Aberdeen, the system covered hundreds of miles. Every blip, every pulse was a whisper from the sky. The operators were young, many barely 20, most of them women from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. They learned to read the flicker of green light as if it were a language. To them, the war already existed, though no one outside the bunkers could see it. At night, the towers glowed faintly in the moonlight, and their shadows fell across the dark fields like the bars of a cage. One engineer, watching from his tent, wrote in his diary, "We have built something vast and wordless. Someday, someone will hear it and understand what it cost." Watson Watt kept pushing. He met ministers in smoky rooms, showing them maps of coverage zones and sketches of new transmitters. "If we can finish by summer," he insisted, "we'll have time to train the operators before war comes." A politician laughed nervously. "You sound certain, Doctor." Watson Watt's reply was quiet. "I am." By September 1939, Germany had invaded Poland. The world that had doubted him was suddenly desperate for his machines. Construction accelerated. The engineers worked through storms, through blackouts, through shortages of steel. When one tower collapsed during testing, killing 2 men, their names were erased from records to protect the secret. The next day, another crew took their place. At the filter room in Bentley Priory, the nerve center of fighter command, lines from every radar station converged. The room buzzed with telephones, typewriters, and the scratch of chalk on vast maps. Plotters moved colored markers across the boards, representing squadrons that pilots hadn't yet seen. Above them, a sign read, "The few depend on the invisible." Even the Royal Air Force pilots didn't know exactly how the information reached them. Orders came through the radio, headings, altitudes, enemy numbers, but no one explained how headquarters knew so quickly. Some whispered that the generals had spies in the Luftwaffe. Others joked that they could read minds. The truth was stranger. By early 1940, 20 full stations formed the radar shield of Britain. Each had 4 towering transmitters and 4 receiving masts spaced like sentinels, feeding their signals into underground huts alive with static. Together they created a single, invisible curtain across the sky, a wall of waves. On paper, it looked perfect. In reality, it was held together with guesswork, duct tape, and exhaustion. The machines overheated. The cables froze. Operators fainted from fatigue. Yet every day, the wall held. In the spring, a test alert ran from south to north. The blips appeared on screens within seconds, hopping from Dover to Scarborough like fireflies in the dark. A technician shouted, "It works!" The whole chain. For a moment, the control room erupted in cheers. Someone opened a bottle of warm cider, passing it around like champagne. But Watson Watt, standing in the doorway, didn't smile. "It's not for celebration," he said. "It's for warning." Because deep inside, he knew what was coming. That summer, Luftwaffe scouts began crossing the channel, their cameras clicking over English soil. Pilots reported strange towers rising along the coast. Berlin dismissed them as civil radio masts. The British said nothing. By August 1940, the storm finally broke. The sirens wailed across the southern coast, and the people of England ran for cover. But in the bunkers beneath the towers, the operators were already at their screens, tracking the waves of aircraft long before anyone could hear them. The wall was alive, and the Battle of Britain had begun. In the control room, the women watched dots move like raindrops. For them, just signals. For the pilots, life or death. Bentley Priory, summer 1940. The air inside the operations room was thick with cigarette smoke and the low hum of electricity. The war outside roared unseen, yet here, in this cavernous room lit by green and amber lamps, the future of Britain flickered across glass screens. The women of the WAF, most barely 18, stood over a vast map table, their hair pinned up beneath headsets, their hands steady on the long magnetic rods used to move colored markers. Each dot represented an enemy formation. Each line, a squadron of British fighters racing to meet them. They moved quickly, silently, sliding the pieces across the map with the grace of dancers. Voices crackled through headphones. Angels 12, bogies inbound, 40 miles off Dover. A new wave appeared on the radar screens. Over 300 aircraft crossing the channel. Sergeant Eileen Younghusband, who would one day write her memories of this room, later said, "We saw the war before anyone heard it." Above them, on a raised platform, stood Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, stuffy, to his men, the architect of the RAF's defense system. His posture was stiff, his face pale, but his mind was razor-sharp. He studied the board like a chess master, each movement measured. Until now, defense had been chaos, scramble everyone, hope for the best. But not today. Today, for the first time in history, war would be fought through information. Dowding leaned to his aide. "Sector 12, intercept. Send an 11 group only. Keep the rest on standby." The order rippled through the network in seconds. Telephones buzzed in operations huts across southern England. At Kenley, Tangmere, and Biggin Hill, klaxons screamed. Pilots sprinted to their Spitfires, engines coughing to life. As they took off, the ground crews waved them upward, shouting through the roar, "Give 'em hell, boys." In the control room, no one cheered. The women kept working, their pencils scratching furiously across the plotting boards, updating altitudes, bearings, velocities. To them, war was geometry, moving lines, changing angles. But every dot that vanished meant a plane falling in flames. Dowding's voice was calm, almost detached. "Tell 11 Group they'll meet contact at Grid 72. "Yes, sir." Minutes later, the first reports came back over radio, clipped, breathless voices, enemy sighted. Angels 12, closing fast. Then static. Then silence. One of the operators glanced up. "Sir." No response from Red Leader. Dowding's eyes narrowed. "Mark it. Replace him with Blue Section." His tone never changed. The decisions came cold, methodical, necessary. Lives became data, but that data was saving the nation. Outside, over the channel, the sky turned black with smoke and contrails. Pilots later said it was like flying inside a furnace. They never saw the faces of the women who guided them, never knew the hands that moved those tiny markers across the board. But they trusted the voices that told them when to climb, when to dive, when to turn. One pilot, Flight Lieutenant Alan Deere, later recalled, "They told us, Angels 12, bogies inbound. I didn't know what radar was, but I trusted the voice. Inside Bentley Priory, Doubting system, the integration of radar, telephones, and command centers was working exactly as he dreamed. The radar stations along the coast fed data to the filter room. From there, the signals were cleaned, sorted, and sent to the plotting tables within seconds. For the first time, an entire battle could be seen unfolding in real time. Historians would later call it the first network-centric war. But to those inside, it felt like trying to see through fog, trusting ghosts on a screen more than the human eye. Every few minutes, the room paused, holding its breath as new information came in. Then the voices resumed, calm, clipped, relentless. Enemy turning north. Send reinforcements to 10 Group. Red Squadron returning low on fuel. Each command was recorded, timed, and pinned to the map. From above, the room looked like an intricate machine made of people. Doubting's quiet voice the heartbeat, the women's quick hands the pulse. By late afternoon, the signals began to thin. The Luftwaffe formations broke apart. Reports came in, confirmed kills, returning pilots, damaged airfields. Britain had survived another day. Doubting finally stepped back from the platform, shoulders sagging. Tell them, well done, he murmured. Then he turned to leave, the smell of ozone and sweat lingering in the air. One operator exhaled shakily, staring at the glowing map. It's strange, she said softly. We win, but it never feels like it. The others said nothing. They knew tomorrow would bring another swarm, another wave of dots, another set of lives rising and falling on a table. Outside, the evening sky over London was streaked red by the setting sun, or maybe by the fires still burning along the coast. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, there was something else. The realization that this invisible network, this web of towers, cables, and human nerves, had changed everything. Because for the first time in history, an army had seen the battle before it happened. But Germany soon realized something was wrong. Their bombers were dying, and no one knew why. They were already waiting for us, as if the British could see through clouds. The Luftwaffe base at Calais was quiet at dawn, just the clatter of fuel drums and the smell of oil and sea salt. Pilots shuffled toward their Heinkel and Dornier bombers, helmets under their arms, faces pale from sleepless nights. The briefings had become grimly familiar. Cross the channel, strike the airfields, return by sunset. But lately, every mission ended the same way. Ambush, chaos, loss. Lieutenant Karl Weiss lit a cigarette with shaking hands. They know we're coming, he muttered. Every time, even in fog. His crew laughed uneasily. One of them whispered, maybe they have eyes in the sky. By August 1940, the pattern was undeniable. German squadrons launched from France, flying low through clouds or under moonlight. And yet, the moment they crossed the channel, British fighters appeared, perfectly timed. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was something else. In Berlin, Hermann Göring raged. Impossible, he shouted during a staff meeting, slamming his fist onto the table. They cannot see us from the ground. Someone is feeding them our plans. He suspected spies, traitors within his own ranks. German intelligence was ordered to find the leak. None of them knew that the leak was a pulse of radio waves bouncing invisibly across the sky. Meanwhile, across the channel, British radar operators barely had time to breathe. The attacks came in waves, sometimes 3 for times a day. At Vintner, at Poling, at Dover, the towers trembled as bombers thundered overhead. Once, during a morning raid, a shell tore through a transmitter cabin, killing 2 technicians instantly. The others kept working, plugging cables through smoke and fire until the signal returned. In a field diary found later, a corporal wrote, "We fixed it before the next wave. The radar never sleeps." On August 12th, Göring decided to target the towers directly. If they are signaling stations, he said, we will tear them from the ground. At 8:30 a.m., German bombers struck 5 sites along the southern coast. Vintner on the Isle of Wight was hit hardest. The control hut obliterated, the operators forced to flee into trenches. For 6 hours, the radar chain broke. In the control room at Bentley Priory, a young WAF officer whispered, "We've lost Vintner." Doubting didn't flinch. "We'll improvise," he said. "Use Poling's signal to cover the gap." By nightfall, the engineers were already rebuilding. They worked by lamplight, hands bleeding, using spare wire and scavenged parts from destroyed stations. When the sun rose again, Vintner was back online. The Luftwaffe's reconnaissance photos showed smoke and twisted metal. Berlin celebrated. Göring declared, "Their network is destroyed." But when the next day's raids came, the British fighters were waiting again. In his report, a confused German intelligence officer wrote, "The towers appear to have no military value. They are struck, yet nothing changes." The truth was that the real power of Chain Home didn't lie in its towers. It lay in the people behind them, the operators, the plotters, the women moving markers in London. The towers could burn, but the system could not. By late August, German pilots began to fear the unseen. Some swore they saw flashes of light in the clouds, as if the English sky itself was watching. One, captured after parachuting into Kent, told his interrogators, "We thought the British had some kind of second sight." At one coastal station, as bombs fell nearby, a radio engineer named Charles Wright shouted over the din, "Keep the generator running." The power flickered, then steadied. The radar beam swept once more across the horizon. "Still seeing them," he yelled. "Still seeing everything." The operators cheered, then ducked as another explosion rocked the hut. For weeks, the Germans tried every trick, flying higher, lower, under cover of darkness, even using decoy formations. It didn't matter. The British response came faster each time. The invisible wall held. One evening, after yet another failed raid, Göring stood on a balcony in France, watching the sunset over the channel. He turned to his adjutant. "They're not guessing," he said quietly. "They know." The adjutant hesitated. "Perhaps, sir, they have a new kind of intelligence." Göring didn't reply. He simply crushed his cigarette beneath his boot and walked away. Back in Britain, the radar rooms hummed without pause. Some operators hadn't seen daylight in days. One wrote to her mother, "It's strange, we fight with echoes. The sky speaks, and we listen." But victory was fragile. The system was stretched thin, cables fraying, generators overheating. Every night, the engineers checked the circuits, praying they'd hold another day. Then came a storm, black skies, thunder rolling over the channel like drums. Lightning struck near Dover, knocking out a transmitter. Power lines sparked. For a few seconds, the entire chain flickered. In the darkness, one operator whispered, "If it all goes out, what then?" Nobody answered. Because one night soon, it almost did. Storms, fire, and a single accident that could have blinded Britain. The screens went dark. For the first time, they were blind. Night of August 24th into the 25th, 1940. Over the Thames estuary, storm fronts stacked like brick walls, lightning stitching the sky in white seams. In the huts along the coast, generators throbbed, mugs rattled on metal tables, and tired operators stared at scopes that suddenly showed nothing. Where there should have been the crawling dance of echoes, there was only a dead green glow. At Dover, a bolt hit close enough to shatter a window. The receiving set coughed, squealed, and fell silent. Fornes reported severe interference. Then the line went to carrier tone. At Vintner, the needles pegged and froze. In the filter room at Bentley Priory, the telephone stuttered and died in handfuls. The plotting table, so alive by day, swelled with question marks. Dowding stood at the rail, a shadow cut from the dim amber light. A WAF officer's voice climbed the stair. "No contact from Dover. No contact from Fornes. Sir, we've lost the coast." He didn't raise his voice. "Radio bearing only. Pull civil telephones if you must. Wake the mobile reserves. To the floor. Keep plotting last known courses. Assume deception." Outside London, the first sirens bloomed. In the blacked-out streets, people opened windows to a sky that growled. Over Kent, German bombers used the storm as a cloak, slipping between towers and cloud banks. Crews in Heinkel's saw only brief X-rays of the world when lightning flashed, rivers, rails, then darkness again. They could not know that the eyes set to stop them had blinked. In a hut at Poling, an engineer named Charles Wright smelled ozone and felt the hair on his arms lift. "Backups," he shouted. The diesel coughed, caught, died, then caught again, the room filled with oily breath. A WAF plotter pinched the bridge of her nose, set her pencil down, and whispered to no one, "Please, not tonight." Dowding moved like a metronome between desks. Send 11 Group to patrol over Gravesend and Hornchurch at Angels 15. Tell them to fly the sectors, not the dots. The order felt medieval, a return to instinct and guess, but it bought minutes. They were precious, because without the wall of waves, the battle became guesswork and courage. Controllers stacked squadrons in the dark, praying they would coincide with an invisible tide. In one sector, pilots flew to the sound of sirens, not to the whisper of radar. A flight leader radioed through static. "We can smell them." "Where are they?" No answer came. Over the Thames, the storm broke in hot sheets. The first bombs fell through cloud onto docks and terrace streets. Fire found oxygen and took it. A cathedral bell rang once, then stopped. The clapper had blown free. In the operations room, the women wrote by memory, last bearings, last speeds, the arithmetic of hope. Somewhere before midnight, a cable team from the post office reached a washed-out trench near Forness, crawling on their bellies with coil and lamp. They spliced in the rain until their fingers bled, wrapped the joint in gutta percha, and waved to the generator crew. The engine surged. One scope blinked back to life, a thin, dirty sweep. "Contact!" A voice in the filter room cracked. Multiple low, over Isle of Sheppey. Pencils stabbed the map. Telephones woke like a flock of birds startled from a tree. Angels 20. Enemy inbound. The words were calm, the hands that wrote them shaking. Not all lines returned, but enough did. In minutes, the scattered geometry reassembled. Plots became tracks, tracks became raids. Controllers found their footing. Vector 320. Climb. Now. Pilots rolled and climbed into cold air, and the black sky began to stitch shut with contrails and the hard white wool of flak. By dawn, the rain was a mist. Columns of smoke rose from the east end. Fire engines stood hissing, men in tin hats passing buckets where hoses had failed. The war cabinet would count more than 400 dead by nightfall. Street sweepers found bomb fins in gutters that still steamed. A boy in Wapping pocketed a shard of perspex he'd swear was ice. At Bentley Priory, the room smelled of sweat and carbon. A signal officer brought doubting a sheet. Timings of loss, timings of repair, timings of first reacquisition. Beneath the grim arithmetic, a single penciled line from a WAF hand. We held on. He read it twice, set the paper down, and said, almost to himself, "We must never be blind again." That morning, orders went out like seeds on wind. Build duplicate lines, bury more cable, station mobile radar vans behind the coast, preposition spare valves and masts. If the towers were the bones, redundancy would be the marrow. Within a week, lorries with collapsible aerials were parked in hedgerows. Within a month, every sector had drilled for total failure. The system learned how to fail and still see. The official report filed it as temporary degradation under electrical disturbance. The operators had other names. The night the sky went silent, the Great Blitz Test. In letters home, a few described praying over generators. Others described the moment the sweep returned and the room exhaled as one body. What the record cannot show is the silence between those heartbeats, the breath before the scope relit, the half-second when a nation's defense depended on wet fingers in a trench and a diesel that chose to catch. When the radar came back, so did hope. The next raids found a Britain that had learned from fear, that had braided its nerves twice over. The tide was turning, and on a Sunday in September, the sky would prove it. They never held a gun, but they saw the enemy before anyone else. Autumn, 1940. The wind carried the smell of burning cities across the southern coast. Britain was tired, its streets cratered, its skies bruised, its people hollowed by sleepless nights. Yet inside the radar huts and control rooms, the quiet work continued, hour after hour, without fanfare or rest. The Battle of Britain had become a rhythm, the blip of a signal, the ring of a phone, the scratch of a pencil across a plotting map. The world outside was chaos, but here, in the dim glow of green screens, the war was geometry, data, and nerve. On the morning of September 15th, the operators at chain home stations noticed something strange. The screens were filling faster than usual, waves of echoes, thicker, closer, climbing over each other like rain in a storm. At Dover, an operator whispered, "There's too many." At Bentley Priory, a WAF officer traced the blips on the plotting table, her magnetic rod trembling slightly. "Sir," she said, "we're counting more than 1,000. Air Chief Marshal Dowding looked down from the balcony, jaw tight. For a moment, even he seemed to hesitate. Then, "All commands, scramble. This is it. Everything we have." Orders flew down the telephone lines like sparks. Biggin Hill, North Weald, Tangmere, Hornchurch, every squadron airborne. The control room came alive, the map beneath its glass top blooming with colored markers. Outside, the sky above England turned white with contrails. Pilots climbed into the sun, their radios hissing. Below, London's rooftops glinted with broken glass. In one of the chain home towers, a technician shouted over the hum of machines, "They're coming in waves." Still climbing. The Battle of Britain had reached its peak. From his Spitfire cockpit, squadron leader John Bolton saw them first, a solid wall of bombers stretching from horizon to horizon. "Good God," he muttered. "There's more of them than sky." He turned toward his wingmen. "Stay tight. We hit them before they hit London." The first dive came at 19,000 feet, sunlight flashing off metal wings, gunfire stitching the air. Explosions flickered across the formation. Engines screamed. Smoke spiraled down like black ribbons through the clouds. But for every bomber that fell, two more seemed to appear. The air was thick with fragments, shrapnel, glass, paper, and the smell of fuel. Yet the RAF held its line, guided from below by calm, unwavering voices. In the filter room, operators tracked every movement. "Angels 20, one called out. Enemy turning north." Another voice answered, "Blue section, engage. Red section, break left." They didn't know the names of the pilots they were saving. They didn't see the dogfights. But they heard the rhythm of the battle through headphones and static, the clipped breathing, the sudden silence that meant someone was gone. By midday, the German formations began to falter. Fighter escorts were running low on fuel, forced to turn back toward the channel. The bombers pressed on alone, their ranks thinning, their gunners firing blind. At 1:05 p.m., an operator at Forness shouted, "They're turning. They're turning back." Cheers erupted in the control room, but quietly, almost reverently, as if afraid to break the spell. One of the WAF plotters wiped her eyes and whispered, "We made it." Dowding didn't smile. He simply said, "Keep tracking. There will be more." That afternoon, Churchill visited Fighter Command. He stood beside the plotting table, watching the women move their rods with practiced precision. "So this is where the battle is fought," he murmured. Dowding only nodded. Later that day, the Prime Minister would tell the nation, never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. But even he did not mention the ones who fought the battle without ever leaving the ground. In the following days, reports flooded in. Over 60 German aircraft destroyed, hundreds damaged, countless others scattered across the channel. The Luftwaffe had lost its momentum, and with it, the dream of invasion. At the coastal towers, technicians finally allowed themselves a rare pause. One lit a cigarette and said, "Maybe we'll get some sleep tonight." His partner laughed softly. "Not if the sky has anything to say about it." When the last alert faded and the radar screens quieted, the operators stood for a long time, listening to the hum of the machines that had carried them through the storm. Eileen Younghusband, one of the women who'd tracked the raids, would later write, "We didn't win with guns. We won because we could see." By winter, the towers of chain homes stood battered but unbroken. Their wires sang in the wind. The radar huts smelled of dust and victory. And for the first time in a year, the English Channel lay still, no longer a battlefield, but a shield of quiet waves. Historians would later call it technology's triumph. But for those who lived it, it was something deeper, the proof that knowledge, patience, and courage could hold back even the darkest sky. In a war of fire and steel, Britain's strongest weapon was something no one could see. And that changed everything.